General Hospital will reveal Brad had always been a man of contradictions, his soul perpetually torn between good and evil, desire and conscience. Yet, never before had he felt such an intense and overwhelming internal conflict until the moment he inadvertently crossed paths with Marco in Port Charles. From the very first glance, Brad found himself utterly captivated by Marco's mysterious charm and gentle allure, qualities he had never encountered in anyone else. In that instant, Brad's restless and doubtful heart began beating in a way he'd never known, and from then on, Marco became an obsession, haunting his thoughts, dreams, and every waking breath. However, Brad quickly realized a painful truth: Marco was not free for him to pursue. Marco was already deeply involved with Lucas, the man Brad had once loved, hurt, and whose loss still haunted him deeply. Brad understood clearly that he had no right to interfere with Lucas's newfound happiness, yet his intense longing for Marco drove him to disregard everything else. For the first time in his life, Brad allowed himself to become selfish, willing to go to any lengths, ignoring consequences, just to win Marco from Lucas's grasp. Brad devised a calculated and intricate plan, meticulously orchestrating opportunities to get closer to Marco. He intentionally appeared at places Marco frequented, whether it was a cozy cafe or the law firm where Marco worked. Each seemingly accidental encounter was precisely arranged by Brad to feel natural, effortless, and friendly. Brad skillfully engaged Marco in casual yet intimate conversations, carefully discovering Marco's interests, his fears, his hidden insecurities, and subtly identifying any emotional gaps that Lucas might unintentionally leave open in Marco's heart. Brad knew that in order to win Marco's heart, he had to subtly plant seeds of doubt about Marco's relationship with Lucas. Patiently, Brad stirred small yet persistent uncertainties in Marco's mind, causing Marco to quietly question whether the bond he shared with Lucas was as profound and stable as he believed. With uncanny sensitivity, Brad easily noticed Marco's moments of hesitation, the flashes of uncertainty sparked by Brad's deliberately vague but suggestive remarks. The more Marco seemed to waver, the more fiercely determined Brad became, approaching him with a blend of tenderness and relentless persistence, driven by an uncontrollable desire to possess the man who had awakened his heart. Meanwhile, the relationship between Marco and Lucas had originated under extraordinary, seemingly destined circumstances. They had first met in Miami, on a night when Lucas was drowning in anguish and despair over discovering Brad's betrayal. Marco, with his sincere compassion and undeniable charm, became the emotional anchor Lucas desperately needed at that vulnerable moment. Amidst heartbreak and disillusionment, Lucas unexpectedly found his heart healing as he spent time with Marco. In Marco's embrace, Lucas felt safe, reassured, and truly at peace. For Marco's part, he quickly fell deeply in love with Lucas, sincerely and unconditionally. Marco understood the wounds Brad had inflicted upon Lucas and devoted himself tirelessly to healing Lucas's heart. Together, they started building a relationship that was gentle, beautiful, yet profoundly meaningful. Marco believed Lucas was the true love he had always searched for, and Lucas placed his trust entirely in Marco, believing he had finally found lasting happiness. Their bond grew steadily stronger, beautifully serene and deeply rooted, until Brad's unexpected appearance threatened everything they had carefully nurtured. Driven by his intense longing and escalating obsession with Marco, Brad created a storm of emotional turmoil among the three men. Marco soon found himself standing at a difficult crossroads: continue with Lucas, embracing a love that was calm, genuine, yet perhaps too safe, or risk exploring the tumultuous passion and irresistible temptation that Brad represented. Lucas sensed the peril Brad posed, once again confronting his deepest fear, the loss of someone he cherished. And Brad, though painfully aware he had become the selfish, guilty third person in this complex triangle, found himself unable to retreat. Thus, this complicated triangle grew increasingly tense and dangerous, pushing them into a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Each man was forced to question the nature of true love, wondering if they possessed the courage to choose wisely, and perhaps even more crucially, if they were strong enough to let go when necessary. Brad's unexpected appearance quickly shattered the peaceful and fragile happiness that had just begun to blossom between Lucas and Marco. Marco, who had always been calm and steady, found himself deeply unsettled for the first time. Brad wasn't just some stranger who happened to show up unexpectedly, he represented Lucas's painful past, one that Lucas had struggled so hard to leave behind. Lucas immediately fell into a state of intense anxiety, as old wounds and memories of past betrayal suddenly came flooding back, stronger and more painful than ever. Lucas was terrified by the thought that Brad's presence could once again cost him the man he loved, and this time, the pain would undoubtedly be even worse. While Lucas grappled with his fears and uncertainties, Marco faced an internal crisis just as complex and tormenting. Previously, Marco had been certain about his feelings, believing wholeheartedly that Lucas was the only person he would ever need in his life. But ever since Brad reappeared, everything inside Marco had become chaotic and uncertain. Brad boldly expressed his affection with a passionate intensity that Marco had never experienced before, overwhelming him with unfamiliar emotions. Brad's captivating words, penetrating gaze, and gentle yet assertive gestures unintentionally caused Marco to question the very foundation of his feelings and his commitment to Lucas. What further confused Marco was the undeniable fact that he couldn't stop thinking about Brad, no matter how hard he tried to resist. Each encounter with Brad quickened his heartbeat, clouded his mind, and distracted him to the point where he could barely focus on anything other than the irresistible magnetism emanating from this mysterious man. Brad's allure lay not only in his striking appearance but also in the intriguing contradictions within his personality, his simultaneous warmth and coldness, sincerity and secrecy, which pulled Marco toward him with an intensity Marco had never before encountered. Deep down, Marco knew that Lucas was the one he truly loved, the man who had stood by him during difficult times, offering warmth, sincerity, and emotional stability. Yet, the harder he fought to suppress his growing attraction toward Brad, the more conflicted and troubled he became. Marco found himself trapped in a fierce internal struggle, torn between his genuine, peaceful love for Lucas and the tantalizing yet dangerous temptation Brad represented. Lucas quickly sensed Marco's shifting emotions, which only heightened his anxiety and fear. His growing unease made it impossible for Lucas to hide his fear that Marco might soon leave him, just as others had done in the past. Despite his best efforts to remain calm, Lucas's trust in the relationship began to unravel. He knew Brad better than anyone else, fully aware of Brad's determination and willingness to go to any lengths to get what he wanted. And right now, Marco was Brad's sole focus. Ultimately, Brad's bold actions and relentless pursuit plunged Lucas and Marco into a deep emotional crisis, thrusting all three men into a perilous whirlpool of desire, ambition, and selfishness. A silent but intense emotional battle had begun, forcing each of them to confront painful choices and sacrifices they never imagined they'd have to face. Because of this, a silent yet dangerously intense battle began to emerge among the three men, steadily drawing them deeper into a whirlwind of emotional chaos. Brad, driven by a fierce and relentless determination, was prepared to stop at nothing to claim Marco as his own, even if it meant shattering the delicate bond Marco had begun to build with Lucas. Brad carefully crafted every interaction, exploiting his charm, his captivating aura, and the undeniable chemistry that seemed to electrify the air whenever he and Marco were together. With each passing day, Brad's obsession grew stronger, pushing him toward increasingly bold and risky decisions. He knew that capturing Marco's heart required a balance of patience, seduction, and manipulation, and he meticulously employed each of these strategies without hesitation or remorse. Meanwhile, Lucas found himself thrust into the very heart of this turbulent conflict, forced to face a painful reality he had desperately hoped to avoid. The relationship he treasured with Marco, which had been a sanctuary of peace and stability after the pain inflicted by Brad's past betrayal, now felt dangerously vulnerable. Each glance Marco shared with Brad, each hesitation or subtle shift in Marco's behavior, amplified Lucas's anxiety, feeding the growing fear that his happiness might once again slip from his grasp. Lucas knew he was in the midst of a brutal, silent war, where every subtle gesture, every unspoken word, became a weapon aimed straight at his heart. Haunted by the memories of Brad's past deception, Lucas struggled internally, unsure whether to trust Marco fully or guard himself from yet another devastating heartbreak. At the center of this emotional maelstrom stood Marco, more deeply torn than he had ever imagined possible. He was faced with an excruciatingly painful choice that left him paralyzed with indecision. On one hand, he had Lucas, a man whose gentle love and unwavering sincerity had healed his past wounds, offering a secure and comforting haven. Marco cherished the peaceful stability and genuine affection that Lucas provided, appreciating the quiet strength their bond had developed over time. Yet, on the other hand, there was Brad, whose intense passion and irresistible allure offered Marco something dangerously thrilling, something filled with raw desire and excitement that he had never previously encountered. Brad's presence awakened hidden feelings within Marco, stirring in him a hunger and longing he found increasingly impossible to ignore or suppress. Marco's internal struggle grew more intense with each passing day, as he found himself drawn deeper into Brad's irresistible orbit, despite his sincere efforts to resist temptation and remain loyal to Lucas. The passion, tension, and conflicting emotions swirling within Marco's heart created a constant, exhausting torment. He grappled with the guilt of betraying Lucas emotionally and the equally powerful fear of missing out on a love so fiercely exhilarating that it left him breathless. As he stood suspended between the tranquil warmth Lucas offered and the magnetic, intoxicating promise Brad represented, Marco knew that his eventual decision, whichever way it leaned, would bring inevitable pain and consequences that would alter their lives forever. This intricate, explosive love triangle rapidly escalated, becoming increasingly complex, dramatic, and unpredictable. Each man was drawn into a high-stakes emotional confrontation filled with passion, jealousy, betrayal, and sacrifice. As their tangled relationships continued to unravel, it became clear that none of them could emerge from this emotional storm untouched or unchanged. With every move, every secret, and every whispered confession, the situation intensified, hurtling them toward a breaking point that would ultimately force each man to confront not only their feelings but also the darker truths hidden deep within their own hearts. Stay tuned to discover how this emotionally charged, dangerous, and tension-filled battle between three men will ultimately unfold. Will Brad succeed in his pursuit, winning Marco's heart through sheer obsession and relentless persistence? Or will Marco find the strength to resist the intense temptation Brad offers and return to Lucas, determined to protect the fragile happiness they've only just begun to build? And Lucas, once wounded and scarred by betrayal, will he be strong enough to hold on to the relationship he cherishes most, or will he once again fall into the abyss of heartbreak? As the silent war between these three hearts intensifies, Marco, Lucas, and Brad are forced to confront the darkest corners of their souls. Brad begins to realize that in his desperate attempt to claim Marco, he's not only hurting those around him but slowly destroying himself. The schemes and selfishness begin to unravel with consequences more devastating than he anticipated, and for the first time, Brad must face the choice between continuing his obsessive pursuit or letting go to rediscover the better man he once aspired to be. Marco, after enduring countless emotional battles between his deep love for Lucas and the dangerous allure of Brad, finally comes to understand what truly matters. He realizes that no matter how powerful Brad's pull may be, it is fleeting, a spark of desire that, if followed, would cost him the genuine, steadfast love he has with Lucas. But just as Marco turns back to express his love and loyalty, he faces a harsh truth. Lucas, once so trusting and devoted, is now deeply hurt by Marco's moment of weakness. Now, Marco must confront the painful reality that returning may not be enough, and that healing what was broken might take more than words. He must prove, with honesty and courage, that his love is still worth fighting for. Lucas, after enduring prolonged anxiety and fear, finally decides to protect himself from another possible betrayal. Yet, deep within, he knows that his heart still belongs to Marco. He realizes that this love triangle was never about winning or losing. It was a complicated journey of broken hearts trying to find their way back to one another. When all the misunderstandings, wounds, and mistakes are laid bare, Lucas must decide whether forgiveness is possible. Can he open his heart once more to Marco and Brad, or will he walk away for good, choosing peace over pain? In the end, as the battle between Brad, Lucas, and Marco reaches its final act, each man is forced to pay the price in his own way. Life will never return to what it once was. They must learn to accept, to grow, and to heal through the deepest of wounds. The answers they seek can only be found when they face the truth within themselves, that love is not just about passion or desire, but about forgiveness, compassion, and the courage to choose what is right, even when it is the hardest path to take. Keep watching to see whether Brad, Lucas, and Marco will find true peace and happiness, or be left with nothing but lingering regret and the lessons carved into their hearts by love lost.